what if the absolute most impactful thing you could do today isn't to, I don't know, speak up or post something online or launch some viral campaign, but just to sit in a waiting room and shut up?
I mean, that is a profoundly uncomfortable thought for anyone raised in our culture. We totally equate volume with value.
We really do. We live in this era where literally everyone is holding a megaphone,
Right.
and we measure impact by instant metrics, dashboards, retweets, applause. It feels like every institution out there, like whether it's a global nonprofit, a massive corporation, or even a local church, they are in this absolute frenzy for visibility.
Oh, totally. A complete frenzy.
Yeah, and we're just surrounded by this comforting illusion that if we just get enough eyeballs on a problem, or if we engineer the perfect, highly polished message, we've somehow changed the world.
And yet, if you actually look at the landscape of human suffering, or even just everyday loneliness, that megaphone approach is, well, it's yielding diminishing returns. We have maxed out the volume knob, but the trust deficit it's never been wider.
Oh, wow.
People are just exhausted. I mean, they are incredibly guarded because they've been conditioned to expect every interaction to be a transaction, right? Like a pitch or some thinly veiled form of brand management.
Which perfectly brings us to the source material for today's deep dive. We are unpacking this fascinating, highly disruptive document, and it's titled Presence as Ministry.
It's such a compelling read.
It really is. And the mission here today is to explore this radically countercultural framework the text presents.
Yeah.
It essentially argues that the most persuasive, enduring thing anyone can do, and the text specifically focuses this lens on Christian ministry and the church, but it argues the ultimate strategy isn't to be the loudest or the first to speak. The strategy is simply to stay.
Yeah, to just stay. And that concept cuts across the grain of like every modern organizational instinct we have. We're trained to scale, right? To move quickly, to optimize everything. So staying put just feels incredibly inefficient.
Exactly. So to set the table for you listening right now, while our source text is explicitly rooted in Christian theology and, the mechanics of ministry, the psychology and the sociology it exposes are just universally gripping.
Oh, 100%. They apply to everyone.
Right. We are talking about the fundamental architecture of how human beings form trust. So whether you're leading a corporate team or trying to show up for a grieving friend, or just trying to navigate your own neighborhood without treating everyone like a background character in your life, the insights here are profound.
Fundamentally, I think this material is almost like an autopsy.
An autopsy. Okay, I like that.
Yeah, an autopsy of what happens when organizations and individuals mistake attention for actual credibility.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because the text identifies this massive trap right out of the gate. We assume that visibility equals fruitfulness. Like a ministry or any organization gets 1,000 people to a weekend event, or they get a massive spike in online engagement, and they immediately think, oh, we're building trust. But the source draws a razor-sharp distinction here. It says attention is completely different from trust.
And that distinction is actually rooted in human neurobiology just as much as it is in sociology.
Wait, really? How so?
Well, think about it. A crowd can be easily manipulated into being impressed in a moment. You can totally engineer an emotional high, with the right lighting, the right music, a really charismatic speaker.
Sure, yeah.
But a community only becomes convinced over a long period of time. And the text brings up this brilliant critique of what it calls transactional help and spiritual branding.
Because people have this highly tuned radar for being managed.
They absolutely do. Think about how the human nervous system evaluates safety. If an institution only parachutes into a neighborhood when it needs an audience.
Like for a photo op or something.
Exactly. A photo op, a crisis relief drive, maybe a massive holiday event. But then they entirely disappear when the unglamorous daily responsibilities of community life resume. The community registers that.
Oh, yeah.
The brain literally clocks that inconsistency as a threat, or at the very least as something fundamentally unreliable.
You definitely feel it when someone is just using your neighborhood for their own optics. And the text explicitly warns about this. It says ministries quietly lose their souls when they move to messages before relationships, to initiatives before proximity, and results before roots.
Results before roots, that's a powerful phrase.
It is. Let me frame this with an analogy for you. Think about a massive international coffee chain launching a multi-million-dollar ad campaign.
Okay, yeah.
And the campaign is all about how much they care about community. They get 1 billion views online. But there is zero actual localized brand loyalty if the barista making your drink won't even look you in the eye, right?
Right. It's totally disconnected.
Exactly. Now contrast that with the local mom and pop diner on the corner. They don't have a marketing budget. They don't have an Instagram manager. But they know your regular order. They know your kid was sick last week. They ask about your aging parents.
Yeah, they actually know you.
Right. And when your life falls apart, you don't go to the billboard for comfort. You go to the diner.
That is such a good way to put it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, that diner has built credibility through continuity rather than intensity.
Continuity over intensity.
Exactly. The text argues that deep spiritual or moral influence is almost never born in a high-performance environment. It's forged in ordinary faithfulness.
So it's about being steady.
Yes. The underlying mechanism here is predictability. When a community sees the same faces returning, the same hands offering quiet help without a camera crew hovering around, the nervous system of that community begins to downregulate. Defensiveness drops.
The phrase that really leaped off the page for me in this section was the contrast the author makes between a ministry that merely visits versus a ministry that dwells.
Oh, dwelling. That requires a totally different posture.
How so?
Well, a visitor always retains their autonomy. Think about it. A visitor can leave when things get messy, when the weather turns bad, or when the host becomes difficult. But a dweller is implicated in the fate of the place.
Wow. Implicated in the fate of the place. But I need to be the devil's advocate here for a second.
Vote for it.
Because if I am a leader or an organizer listening to this deep dive right now, my immediate thought is going to be, isn't sitting around and dwelling just an incredible luxury?
A luxury. What do you mean?
Let's be real. If a neighborhood is literally starving or a community is in the middle of a massive addiction crisis, sitting quietly and learning everyone's name over 6 months feels painfully privileged. Doesn't urgency demand the megaphone? Doesn't a crisis require us to prioritize efficiency over this slow, romanticized idea of presence?
And that is the exact tension the text anticipates. But it addresses it not with some sociological theory, but by pointing directly to its theological blueprint.
Incarnation, right?
Exactly, the doctrine of the incarnation. The author argues that God himself did not prioritize efficiency in the face of a cosmic crisis.
Which is pretty mind-blowing when you frame it like that.
It really is. The text anchors this entirely on John chapter 1, verse 14. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us.
The source material leans so heavily on that idea of the divine entering the dirt. It points out that God didn't save the world from a safe, sterile distance. He didn't, issue a white paper from heaven or send relief by remote control.
And to really understand how radical that is, you have to look at the historical and philosophical context the author is drawing from.
Yeah, take us back to that.
Okay, so in the first century Greco-Roman world, the gods stayed on Mount Olympus. The divine was characterized by this concept of apatheia, which is the inability to suffer or be affected by human misery.
So to be divine was basically to be detached.
Exactly. But this text argues that the Christian framework completely upends that. The divine willingly embraces the dust, the hunger, the political tension, the fatigue, and the grief of the human condition.
And the text makes this brilliant contrast here between a hovering church and a dwelling church.
Oh, yeah. Hovering versus dwelling.
Right. A hovering organization stays just close enough to observe the world's wounds. They might study the wounds, they might write a brilliant academic paper about them, or even launch a massive fundraising campaign based on them.
Sure.
But they remain far enough away in their safe, comfortable suburbs to not be materially affected by any of it. But a dwelling church, they actually enter the blast radius of those wounds.
Which brings us right back to your question about efficiency versus presence. The text points to the literal timeline of the life of Jesus to answer that.
The timeline is wild.
It is. He spends 30 years in total obscurity in Nazareth. 30 years, working a manual trade, living as a neighbor, attending local funerals, paying taxes, just participating in the mundane reality of human life.
Yeah.
And all of this precedes a mere 3 years of public, visible ministry.
30 years of hiddenness for just 3 years of action.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that ratio completely destroys our modern metrics for a successful launch.
Oh, completely.
If a modern agency were managing that timeline, they would call those 30 years a catastrophic waste of potential reach.
They absolutely would. But the text frames those 30 years not as a delay, but as a prerequisite.
A prerequisite.
Yeah, because true presence has a severe emotional and physical cost. To dwell among people means you must absorb the weight of their brokenness. The author notes that Jesus touched the untouchable like lepers, social pariahs, which crossed massive cultural boundaries at the time.
Right.
He wept at the tomb of Lazarus. His ministry was, in the words of the text, embodied before it was explained.
Embodied before it was explained. I love that. That means the disciples had to physically watch grace move through a human life before they were ever asked to preach it.
Exactly.
And the text warns against what it calls disembodied religion,
Hmm.
which is having this absolute flawless doctrinal precision, but being entirely absent relationally.
It's the tragic irony of communities that can defend their theology with just breathtaking eloquence, but fail to actually inhabit the places where that faith is needed.
Mm.
They speak endlessly of justice, but they don't know a single marginalized person by name. They preach profound compassion, but have absolutely no actual practice of companionship.
But okay, if we commit to dwelling
Right.
and we get up close to all that pain, the text brings up a very real hazard here: burnout.
Oh, yeah. Burnout is a huge risk.
Because the author explicitly states that presence without prayer becomes exhaustion. If you are just constantly absorbing the trauma of your neighborhood without a way to process it, nearness just becomes a fast track to emotional collapse.
Because the human frame simply isn't designed to carry the weight of the world on its own.
Right.
The text observes that Jesus constantly withdrew to solitary places to pray. His public availability was entirely sustained by his private hiddenness. Without that tether to the divine, the helper eventually just becomes consumed by the crisis they are trying to alleviate.
Which this pivots us into one of the most convicting parts of this entire deep dive. Because there is a massive chasm between drawing near to someone to love them and drawing near to someone to fix them.
Oh, yes. That is such an important distinction.
Not every attempt at nearness is actually helpful. The text draws a very sharp, very uncomfortable moral boundary between holy nearness and harmful intrusion.
Right. Presence heals, but intrusion harms. The author summarizes the difference so brilliantly here. Let me quote the idea. Presence says, "We are here if you need us." Intrusion says, "You should receive us because we are here."
I have to confess, reading that line was an absolute gut punch for me,
Really?
because I have absolutely been the intruder.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Years ago, a close friend of mine lost a parent very suddenly. And instead of just going over and sitting with them, I totally panicked.
That's a very normal reaction, honestly.
Well, I felt this immense pressure to be useful, So
Yeah.
I showed up unannounced. I brought a stack of books on grief processing, and I immediately started offering all this unsolicited advice about the stages of mourning.
Oh, I see.
I completely ruined the moment. I was just trying to manage my own anxiety about their pain under the guise of helping them.
That is a classic example of what the text calls the religious temptation to help. And it is incredibly common. We all do it.
We really do.
We rush in, not because the grieving person is actually ready to process, but to satisfy our own ego's need to feel competent, to feel useful. We use the extreme urgency of a crisis as a moral excuse to just steamroll someone's dignity.
Wow, yeah.
Just steamrolling. We tell ourselves, well, I have the truth, or I have the solution. Therefore, I am entitled to immediate access to your inner life.
And the author hits on this profound point about silence here. Intrusion absolutely hates silence.
It really does.
It cannot stand a vacuum because silence cannot be controlled.
Mm.
In Western culture, we generally view silence in a conversation as a failure, right? Like a dead zone that urgently needs to be filled with words. But the text argues that honoring silence is actually a profound form of respect. Not every bleeding wound requires a lecture.
Exactly, because a person in trauma might not even have the language yet to explain their pain, or a skeptic might not be ready to answer a barrage of interrogating questions about their beliefs. Intrusion forces an interaction because the helper is deeply uncomfortable with unresolved tension. Presence, however, honors the reality that building actual trust takes time.
There is this really powerful illustrative parable in the text that makes this dynamic crystal clear.
Oh, the two helpers at the door.
Yes. Imagine a family that has just suffered a catastrophic loss. Two different helpers arrive at their door. Helper number one knocks loudly, bursts through the front door, and immediately starts reorganizing the kitchen.
Just taken completely over.
Exactly. They speak at 1,000,000 miles an hour, offer a dozen rapid-fire solutions, ask deeply probing questions before any relational equity has been built, and essentially organize the grieving family around the helper's own hyperactive agenda.
And the intention of that first helper might be entirely sincere.
Right. They genuinely want to alleviate suffering.
But the execution makes the family feel managed. It makes them feel guarded and completely overwhelmed.
They just smile politely, but their emotional walls go up instantly. Then you have helper number 2. She knocks gently. She asks if it is even a good time to visit. And crucially, this is the key, she is actually willing to take no for an answer.
That is huge.
When she's invited in, she just sits. She listens exponentially more than she speaks. She doesn't attempt to turn the family's raw tears into a neat theological teaching opportunity. She is present, but she is utterly undemanding.
And as a result, trust grows organically, right? Because she didn't try to force it like some hothouse flower. And this raises an important question that often confuses people in service-oriented roles. Are boundaries unloving?
That's a great question.
Because there is this toxic narrative, sometimes very prevalent in religious or activist circles, that if you have boundaries, you aren't sacrificing enough. You aren't all in.
Wait, let's pause there for a second and define a term that often gets thrown around in these discussions: enmeshment. Because I think people listening right now might confuse loving someone deeply with losing yourself in someone else's dysfunction.
Oh, it's a vital distinction. So enmeshment is a clinical psychological term. It describes a relationship where personal boundaries are so blurred that you can literally no longer tell where your emotions end and the other person's begin.
Like you absorb their anxiety as your own.
Exactly. If they are upset, you feel you must be upset. The text argues that love without boundaries isn't actually love, it is enmeshment.
Wow.
Boundaries are what actually make love trustworthy. To respect someone's pace, to honor their no, is to acknowledge that they are an autonomous human being made in the image of God, not just an extension of your own ego.
The author points to Jesus talking to the Samaritan woman at the well as the ultimate case study in boundaries here.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
He invites her into conversation. He calls her out on things, but he never corners her. He never coerces her. He doesn't force her to publicly disclose her entire traumatic relational history just for the sake of dramatic transparency.
Right.
He engages her, but he leaves her dignity completely intact.
He uses divine revelation to heal her, not to humiliate her. And that is a radically different use of power than what we normally see in leadership today.
Which leads perfectly into the next major hurdle the text identifies. Let's say you successfully navigate the entry, right? You knock gently, you respect boundaries, and you are finally invited into someone's life.
Okay, yeah.
You can still cause immense damage if you try to own the outcome of their journey. The text offers this terrifying warning to anyone in leadership, coaching, or communication about the temptation of what it calls extraction.
Extraction, yes. Extraction is basically the dark side of the modern content economy applied to human suffering.
Explain that.
Well, control is fundamentally about managing outcomes, right? It wants visible, trackable progress. It demands predictable gratitude so the helper feels validated. Extraction happens when a leader or an organization harvests someone else's trauma to use as a compelling sermon illustration or a case study or a success story on social media before that person has actually been cared for as a human being.
It is literally turning someone's actual life into PR content.
Yes.
And we live in a culture where literally every experience is optimized, repurposed, and posted.
Yeah.
The text pleads with leaders to protect the vulnerable from being strip-mined for inspiration.
It asks this devastating diagnostic question, and I want everyone to hear this. What can this person's story contribute to the appearance of our ministry's effectiveness?
Oh, man.
When we ask that, we are treating a person merely as a means to an end. It is a severe moral failure. The alternative is to ask, how can I love this person as a bearer of the divine image, even if nobody ever hears their story?
So what does this all mean when we look at the source text? Look at how it analyzes the story of Zacchaeus, the corrupt tax collector.
Right.
Jesus doesn't treat Zacchaeus as a conversion trophy. He doesn't secure a public confession, hand him a microphone, and then instantly move on to the next town to brag to his donors about his numbers.
No, he doesn't.
He goes to the man's house. He shares a long, quiet meal. He treats him as a complete person, restoring a man whom the entire society had reduced to a despised label.
And the healing of the blind man operates on the exact same logic. Jesus didn't just perform a miracle and leave the man standing there as a medical curiosity or some spectacle to boost his own approval ratings. He restored the man's social dignity within the community.
The person was always prioritized over the display of power.
Always.
So what does this all mean? This requires a massive, uncomfortable gut check for anyone listening who considers themselves a helper. Are we helping because we love the person, or are we helping because it makes us look fruitful? Am I serving this person because it is genuinely good for them, or am I serving them because I secretly need to be the hero of the story?
And what the author points out, which is actually incredibly liberating, is that giving up that control is the only way to survive a life of service. If you believe that someone else's spiritual or emotional growth depends entirely on your perfect management of their life, you will live in a state of perpetual agonizing panic. You will Transformation is fundamentally the slow work of the divine, or in secular terms, the slow process of internal psychological healing. You are freed from that burden.
You don't have to force it.
Exactly. You can plant the seed, you can water the soil, you can sit beside the garden, but you do not have to scream at the seed to make it grow.
Waiting isn't lazy inactivity. It is an act of active trust.
I love that framing from the text.
It's beautiful.
So if we agree that we are meant to dwell with people, that we must respect their boundaries, and that we must serve them without trying to extract content from their pain, where exactly is all of this supposed to happen?
Right, the location.
If we aren't relying on big staged events, where does presence actually live? The source material takes us on this amazing tour of the sacred geography of everyday life. And the argument here is absolutely vital. If ministry or genuine human connection only happens inside designated sanctuaries, boardrooms, or scheduled therapy hours, the vast majority of the human race will simply never encounter it.
And they'll never walk through the doors.
Right. Ordinary places are not spiritually dead zones. They are the primary human zones, where the desperation for grace is most acute.
The way this text redefines the geography of, like, a normal Tuesday commute is brilliant. It breaks down 5 specific locations. Let's walk through them, starting with the street.
Okay, so the street is defined by transit and urgency. It is a place of movement. But the author notes that rapid movement often acts as camouflage for immense pain. Hurried people carry unseen burdens. So presence on the street doesn't mean standing on a soapbox with a megaphone screaming at traffic.
Thankfully.
Right. It might be the simple, profound discipline of noticing, refusing to treat the person walking past you as an obstacle or an NPC.
An NPC. Like a non-player character in a video game.
Exactly. We treat people like background characters in our own personal game. A greeting or just a moment of unhurried eye contact in a place totally defined by rush can be a radically disruptive act of grace.
Next, the text moves into the market. Now, this could be the grocery store, the corporate office, the stock exchange, really any place of commerce.
And the market is an environment where human value is constantly being negotiated and quantified. What is this product worth? What is this employee's time worth? What can I afford?
It's all transaction.
Yes. In spaces entirely dictated by transaction and profit margins, a Christian presence, or really a deeply ethical human presence, is about honoring intrinsic dignity. It is treating the cashier, the difficult client, or even the rival competitor as someone whose worth vastly exceeds their economic output.
Yeah.
It's embodying fairness in an ecosystem where exploitation is basically the default setting.
That brings us to the third location, the school.
The school is the incubator. Long before anyone ever learns the word theology or ethics, their imagination, their identity, and their social survival patterns are formed in the cafeteria and on the playground.
Kids learn very quickly who is safe and who is dangerous.
They absolutely do. Faithful presence in a school environment doesn't have to be loud or overtly religious. It just needs to be incredibly steady, reliably kind, and fiercely protective of the vulnerable.
Now, the fourth location hit me the hardest. Transit points and waiting areas. We're talking the bus stop, the DMV, the hospital waiting room.
These are liminal spaces.
Liminal literally means threshold.
Right.
Like the in-between places where you no longer where you started, but you haven't arrived at where you were going.
Exactly. It's the psychology of the threshold. The text highlights that waiting rooms strip away our illusions of autonomy and control.
Oh, totally.
When you are sitting in a hospital waiting room, waiting for a biopsy result, or sitting at a bus stop because your car broke down and you can't afford a new transmission, you are forced to confront your extreme vulnerability. People in transit are often far more emotionally porous than they realize.
Wow.
A shared silence, offering a tissue, or just maintaining a calm, grounded demeanor in a room that is thick with anxiety can become a profound encounter. It signals that the divine is present in the terrifying pause, not just at the destination.
And finally, the text brings us to the home. It calls this the most Profoundly underestimated ministry field in existence.
Because the home is the ultimate backstage. It is where the public masks are finally taken off and where love is violently tested by pure, unadulterated fatigue.
Yeah, fatigue is the true test of patience.
It really is. The home is where hidden grief, petty conflicts, and quiet hopes live crammed together. The author argues that the true measure of faithfulness isn't found in how well you perform on a stage, but in how you live behind your own closed doors.
It's in the unseen repetition. How a meal is prepared, how a screaming toddler is patiently corrected at 2 a.m., or how an unexpected guest is welcomed without the host apologizing endlessly for the mess.
And when you trace the biography of Jesus through the Gospels, he is constantly operating in these exact mundane spaces.
Yes, he turned ordinary geography into theological geography. A dusty well in Samaria became the site of massive theological revelation. A dinner table with corrupt tax collectors became the epicenter of radical social inclusion. A dirt road became a mobile classroom for discipleship. He didn't wait in the temple for people to come find him. He went down to the fishing boats.
This completely dismantles what theologians call the sacred-secular divide.
Explain that divide a bit more.
Well, we have this deeply ingrained habit of imagining that our spiritual life happens for 1 hour on Sunday morning and our real life happens the rest of the week. But the text insists that locality is not a limitation. It is a vocation. To be physically rooted in a place, your specific apartment complex, your specific cubicle, is to accept that real work is about depth, not scale.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text points out something fascinating about how God operates in the biblical narrative. God habitually ambushes people in secular spaces, long before they realize the ground is holy.
Right.
Moses is literally just at work, managing sheep in the wilderness, when the bush catches fire. David is forgotten out in a pasture. Jacob wakes up from a dream in the middle of nowhere and says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it."
Yeah.
We are so conditioned to believe God only shows up at the scheduled, well-lit religious event.
But the divine refuses to be confined to our expected sanctuaries. Therefore, anyone wanting to be a faithful presence must learn to be stable in the daily grinding rhythms of life, because that is where true integrity is actually stress tested.
Oh, yeah.
People can smell the difference between strategic kindness, like kindness with an agenda, and sincere kindness. When you return to the same market checkout line, the same school gate, the same park bench over and over, year after year, you slowly accumulate moral credibility.
But let's get incredibly practical here for a minute. Just showing up at the bus stop once and smiling at someone isn't going to magically heal their trauma.
No, it's not.
You can't just stand there like a statue and expect the world to change.
Yeah.
How does this ordinary geography actually yield spiritual fruit? This brings us to the core mechanism of the text, the long obedience of love and the hidden ministry of returning.
The author lays down a fundamental law of human relational dynamics here. Trust is the hidden bridge between presence and proclamation.
Trust is the hidden bridge.
Yes. A skeptical world simply will not receive truth from a voice it does not trust. And trust is not generated by a slick presentation. It is formed through the repetitive, often boring, hidden ministry of returning.
I want to narrate a story from the text that perfectly captures the mechanics of this. It's the parable of the transit corridor.
Oh, I love this story.
Imagine a group of volunteers who decide to serve in a chaotic, highly trafficked transit corridor in a major city. They don't show up on day one with a megaphone, a loud agenda, or some giant branded banner.
They don't make a scene.
Right. They arrive quietly, bringing modest supplies, maybe water, maybe hot coffee, and a posture of listening. They spend weeks just learning the names of the security guards, the newspaper vendors, the daily commuters.
Yeah.
They offer prayer only when specifically asked. They don't force it. And they return, week after week after week.
And at first, the response from the street is entirely predictable.
People are incredibly wary. They are deeply suspicious. They look at these volunteers and think, okay, what's the catch? Are you trying to sell me something? Are you going to corner me with a tract?
Right.
Many people ignore them entirely. But the volunteers don't take it personally. They remain steady. They don't crowd anyone's personal space. They don't use guilt tactics. They just keep showing up.
And then what happens?
Then, maybe 6 or 8 months later, the atmospheric pressure of the corridor begins to shift. A stoic security guard initiates a casual conversation. A vendor asks the volunteers to pray for a sick child. A hardened commuter stops, drops their guard, and shares a heavy private burden. What actually happened in those 8 months? Trust was formed by repetition.
Let's dissect why this works, specifically looking at the psychological concept of pattern matching.
Okay, break that down for us.
Human beings are fundamentally pattern-matching creatures. Because we live in a fractured, disappointing world, our default survival posture is defensive. When a stranger offers help, our amygdala instinctively flares up and asks a series of threat assessment questions.
Like what?
Things like, will you still be here tomorrow? Will your supposed compassion survive my initial rejection? Will you abandon me the moment I become difficult or complicated? We are literally primed to expect abandonment.
We expect the relationship to become transactional the moment we stop being a fun project.
Precisely. But when those volunteers return to the cold transit corridor week after week, month after month, they are physically providing the brain with a new, safe pattern. When the answer to all those defensive internal questions is consistently, yes, I am still here, the nervous system finally stands down. Defensiveness melts. Trust is an accumulation of unbroken promises. The text makes a profound observation here. People ultimately trust consistency far more than they trust intensity.
Consistency over intensity.
They trust humble longevity more than they trust a flashy performance.
And when that bedrock of trust is finally established, something beautiful happens to the way we communicate. The text points out that once you are trusted, offering a prayer no longer feels like a cheap tactic to close an awkward conversation. It feels like genuine, shoulder-to-shoulder solidarity.
Yes.
Sharing a piece of scripture or a deeply held conviction no longer feels like weaponizing a text to win a theological argument. It feels like offering a precious gift to a friend.
Because the words are now being carried by a messenger who has proven themselves to be safe, the message gains immense weight because the messenger has gained credibility. The text distills this into a golden rule: presence before persuasion.
Presence before persuasion.
Trust must precede teaching. Relationship must precede representation.
Okay, but if you are listening to this and you are someone who feels the crushing, agonizing pressure of wanting to make a difference right now, like if you look at the news and feel like the world is burning, the idea of waiting 8 months in a transit corridor just to have one authentic conversation probably feels unbearably slow.
It does. It feels glacial.
How do people practically implement this without feeling like they are failing?
The author offers a piece of advice that is as brilliant as it is practical. He says, start small enough to stay.
Start small enough to stay.
Yes. Do not spread yourself incredibly thin across 5 different neighborhood initiatives or volunteer boards. Choose one single location. Pick one place where people gather naturally and go there with enough consistency that your face becomes part of the architecture.
That's amazing.
Measure your success entirely by the depth of the relationships formed, not by the sheer volume of attendance numbers. Commit to becoming a recognizable, safe presence rather than trying to host an impressive one-off event.
Start small enough to stay. That is a completely liberating metric for success. Because the truth is, the world is exhausted by performance.
So exhausted.
We're collectively burnt out on intrusion, on hot takes, and on transactional relationships that masquerade as genuine care.
And the antidote to that modern exhaustion, as the source material so powerfully argues, is this incarnational model. It is the willingness to draw near, to serve without the neurotic need to control the outcome, to honor the sacred hidden potential of the ordinary geography of your commute, your break room, and your own living room. It is the slow, grueling, but beautiful work of building trust through quiet, unglamorous faithfulness.
The text closes with an image that I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about. It compares this kind of quiet, faithful presence to a simple lamp left on in a house at night.
Oh, that's such a striking image.
Think about what a porch light does. It doesn't shout. It doesn't move around demanding your attention. It doesn't force you to come inside. It just glows, steadily, cutting through the dark, telling the weary, the suspicious, and the lost that someone is home, that the space is safe.
In a transient, chaotic world, just being a steady light is an act of profound mercy.
And that leads me to the final thought I want to leave you with today. Think about your own daily, repetitive routine, your morning commute, the coffee shop you visit every Tuesday, your office break room, the school drop-off line.
Right.
You might feel a low-level despair that you aren't doing anything impactful with your life because you aren't making grand gestures or going viral. But what if your mere consistency in those mundane spaces, your steady kindness, your willingness to remember a cashier's name, your absolute refusal to treat people as transactions, is currently doing a hidden, vital work in someone else's life? A work that is so deep, you might not see the fruit of it for decades. What if simply being the lamp left on for the exhausted people in your periphery is the most profound, lasting legacy you will ever leave?
It is the ultimate inversion of our metrics. The smallest, quietest things are actually the biggest things.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it encourages you to look at your ordinary places and your ordinary interactions with entirely new eyes. Keep the lamp on.